The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A cart half full. A mother standing still. Her hand rested on a can of soup. Then quietly, without a word, she placed it back on the shelf. Her youngest tugged her sleeve. "Mama, why?" She just smiled, that soft, tired smile that said everything and nothing. Outside, gas was cheaper than coffee. Inside, every dollar felt like it was shrinking before she could spend it. Sound familiar? Because that moment, that quiet, dignified putting back, it's happening in every store, in every town, right now. But what happened next, no one saw coming. Her real advantage wasn't earning more money. It was a system almost everyone has forgotten. The scratch-only rule. Shopping day in Harlan's Creek came every second Thursday. Not because the stores demanded it, not because of any sale or special, because Loretta decided it would be so. She pulled on her good walking coat, the brown one with the brass buttons, tucked her notebook into her purse alongside exactly $11.40, and walked the 6 blocks to Henderson's General Store with her son Tommy at her side. Tommy was 7, full of energy, full of opinions, the kind of boy who noticed everything that sparkled. The bell above the door announced their arrival with a cheerful little ring, and the store hit them immediately. Warm air carrying the smell of sawdust and coffee beans, and something faintly sweet from the candy jars lined up beside the register like little glass soldiers. Tommy's eyes went straight to those jars. "Mama!" "Keep walking, sweetheart." She guided him gently but firmly past the candy, past the brightly colored boxes of breakfast cereal with their cartoon characters grinning from the shelves, past the stacked tins of condensed soup with their cheerful red labels. All of it designed to be noticed, all of it calling out like a carnival barker. Loretta didn't even slow down. She walked directly to the dry goods aisle. Flour first, a 10-pound sack, plain cotton, no frills. She lifted it, checked the weight, set it in her basket. Then dried pinto beans, scooped from the barrel into a brown paper bag. Rice, a small tin of baking powder, 2 onions, a bunch of carrots with the dirt still clinging to the roots. Tommy trailed behind her, his small hands clasped behind his back, the way his father walked, watching her move through the store with quiet bewilderment. She paused in front of a display near the back wall. A pyramid of canned beef stew. Bright label, bold lettering, ready in minutes. She picked one up, turned it over, read the price, set it back down. Tommy looked up at her. "Don't we like stew?" "We love stew," she said. "We just make ours." That was the whole philosophy, delivered in 5 words to a 7-year-old boy in a general store on a Thursday morning. Loretta cooked from scratch. Not occasionally, not when she had extra time, always. Every loaf of bread that came out of her oven started as flour and water and a pinch of salt. Every pot of soup began with whatever vegetables she had on hand and a ham bone saved from Sunday dinner. Every birthday cake her children remembered was mixed by hand in a ceramic bowl that had belonged to her own mother. Processed food cost more for less. She understood this not as philosophy, but as simple arithmetic. When you paid for a box, you were paying for the box, for the factory, for the advertisement on the radio, for the convenience of someone else's labor. When you bought flour, you paid for flour. The temptation was real, though. She never pretended otherwise. Standing in that store with tired feet and a long afternoon of cooking ahead of her, Those ready-made items called to something deep and human, the desire for ease, for a shortcut, for one less thing to worry about. She felt it every single time. And every single time she calculated the difference in her head, how many extra meals she could stretch from those same dollars spent on raw ingredients, and she kept walking. By the time she reached the register, her basket held nothing that couldn't be transformed by her own 2 hands into something nourishing and real. Old Mr. Henderson totaled her items slowly, the way he always did, calling each one out like a small announcement. Flour, beans, rice, carrots, onions. He looked up over his reading glasses with something like approval in his eyes. "Your mama," he said to Tommy, "knows how to feed a family." Tommy looked up at Loretta with new eyes, like he was seeing something he hadn't quite noticed before. She paid. She counted her change carefully. She tucked $3.15 back into her purse. Outside, the October air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke from somewhere down the street. Tommy carried the lighter bag. Loretta carried the rest. And walking home through the quiet streets of Harlan's Creek, she already knew in her mind exactly what each ingredient would become, which meals, which nights, how far it would all stretch. Nothing in that basket was an accident. Every single item had a purpose and a destination before it ever crossed her threshold. But even those savings weren't her biggest advantage. The seasonal sacrifice strategy. October in Harlan's Creek had its own particular smell. Wood smoke and cold mud, and the last of the season's apples still hanging heavy on the trees along Birchwood Lane. The maples had gone full amber. The mornings arrived sharp and honest, without any of summer's softness left in them. Loretta noticed all of it. She noticed it the way a farmer notices weather, not for beauty alone, but for information, because the season told her exactly what to cook. It was a Saturday when she spotted Mrs. Garner 2 doors down, loading bushel baskets of late butternut squash from her truck bed into her garage. Loretta was hanging the week's washing on the line, her fingers already pink from the cold. She called over the fence, "How much you asking for a bushel?" Mrs. Garner straightened up and wiped her hands on her apron. 40 cents for the small one, $1 for the big." Loretta nodded slowly. She was already calculating. She bought 2 large bushels before noon. That afternoon, her kitchen smelled of roasting squash and simmering broth. Her daughter, Clara, sat at the table doing her homework while the windows fogged softly from the heat inside. Tommy kept appearing in the doorway, drawn by the smell, asking when supper would be ready. This was autumn food, real autumn food. Not because a recipe magazine said so, not because it was fashionable, because it was cheap and it was abundant, and it would keep through the cold months ahead if she handled it right. Loretta understood something that modern grocery shopping has almost completely erased from our instincts. Food has a season, and food in its season costs a fraction of what it costs out of it. She never bought tomatoes in January. She never bought strawberries in November. Not because she didn't want them, Lord knows she did, but because a January tomato in 1961 had traveled further than most people in Harlan's Creek ever would in their lives, and you paid for every mile of that journey whether you realized it or not. Instead, she preserved. The back shelf of that narrow pantry held her summer work in glass. 14 jars of stewed tomatoes put up in August, 8 jars of sweet corn relish, 6 of bread and butter pickles, made from cucumbers that had cost her almost nothing at the peak of summer, when the gardens were overflowing and farmers practically gave them away. Clara had helped with the canning that summer, standing on a step stool beside her mother, watching the jars line up along the counter like a small glowing army. "Why can't we just buy tomatoes from the store?" she had asked, somewhere around the 4th jar. Loretta had handed her another lid to wipe clean. "We could," she said, "but we'd pay 3 times more and taste half as much." Clara had thought about that, then nodded with the grave seriousness of a child who has just been trusted with real information. It wasn't only canning. Loretta dried herbs from her kitchen garden each September, bundling them with kitchen twine and hanging them from the low beam above the back door until the whole hallway smelled like a countryside apothecary. Sage, thyme, rosemary, each bundle costing her nothing but the small effort of cutting and hanging. She watched her neighbors drive to Henderson's in November for small glass jars of dried herbs at 15 cents apiece, and she said nothing. She simply reached up and pinched what she needed from her own bundles overhead. Adaptation was the real skill underneath all of this. Her family ate what the season offered, and they ate it well. October meant squash soup and cornbread and slow-cooked beans with smoked pork neck bones. November would bring root vegetables, roasted until their edges caramelized and sweetened in the oven heat. December meant the preserved goods from summer coming off the shelves one by one, each jar a small act of foresight finally paying its dividend. There were moments of resistance, of course. Tommy had gone through a phase that fall of refusing to eat squash in any form. He pushed it around his plate with the focused determination of a boy engaged in serious protest. Loretta let him protest. She served it again the next night, and the night after that. On the 4th night, he ate it without comment, and she said nothing, just refilled his bowl quietly and moved on. Because the season wasn't negotiating with a 7-year-old, and neither was she. The weight-based buying secret. There was a scale at the back of Henderson's general store. Most people walked past it without a second glance. It sat on the wooden counter beside the bulk bins like a piece of old furniture, brass fittings gone slightly green with age, a worn leather pad on the weighing platform, a dial face so scratched from years of use that you had to lean close to read the numbers properly. Loretta knew that scale better than almost anyone in Harlan's Creek. She visited it every single shopping trip without exception. It was the mid-month run now, the smaller one than the big shopping day. Just a few items needed to bridge the gap between the month's first haul and the end of the week. She came in alone this time. Tommy was in school. Clara was helping a neighbor after class. The store was quiet in that particular mid-morning way. The light came through the front windows in long, dusty columns. Mr. Henderson was somewhere in the back, moving boxes. The old floorboards registered every step she took toward the dry goods section. She stopped in front of the bulk bins first. Oats on the left, split peas beside them. Further down, 2 varieties of dried lentils, pale orange and deep green, sitting in their open barrels like something quietly patient and reliable. She reached into her purse and pulled out her notebook, opened it to the page where she had written this month's remaining budget in her careful, unhurried handwriting. $1.80 left for dry goods this trip. She looked at the lentils. Then she looked at the small pre-packaged bags of lentils sitting on the shelf directly above the bulk bins. Same lentils, different container. a printed paper label with a small illustrated bowl of soup on the front. The packaged bag cost 31 cents for 12 ounces. From the bulk bin, she could fill a paper sack with a full pound, 16 ounces, for 22 cents. She reached for her paper sack without hesitation. This was the weight-based buying secret, and it was so simple it almost felt like it shouldn't work. You were not buying a package, you were not buying a label, you were not buying the pretty illustration of a soup bowl, or the convenient resealable top, or the brand name printed in cheerful lettering designed to make you feel a certain reassuring way about your purchase. You were buying food, measured in weight, priced accordingly. Strip away everything else, and the question became almost mathematical. How many ounces %? Which option puts the most actual nourishment in her family's bowls per dollar spent? Loretta applied this thinking to everything she bought in bulk: flour, oats, rice, dried beans of every variety, coffee measured out by the quarter pound from the big tin on the counter rather than purchased in the pre-packaged paper bags stacked near the register. She never bought anything she could buy by weight in a pre-packaged form instead. Old Mr. Henderson had come to understand this about her over the years. He would sometimes set aside particularly good bulk stock when it came in, knowing she would want it weighed out properly rather than boxed and shelved. That Thursday, he emerged from the back carrying a small wooden crate, spotted her at the bins, and called across the quiet store. "Mrs. Calloway, got a new sack of stone-ground cornmeal came in this morning. Good local mill up in Clarksburg, fresher than what's been sitting in those bags." She looked up. "How much per pound?" 8 cents. She did the arithmetic instantly, the way she always did, a small, invisible calculation running somewhere behind her steady brown eyes. "I'll take 2 pounds. He nodded and moved to the scale. She watched him measure it out with the comfortable ease of a man who had been doing this his entire working life. The brass weights settled, the dial steadied. He folded the paper sack down twice at the top and set it on the counter beside her other items. It was then that the mid-month challenge arrived, quietly, the way most real challenges do. She opened her notebook to double-check her remaining total and realized she had misread her own handwriting at home that morning. Not $1.08, $1.18. 62 cents less than she had believed when she walked through the door. She stood very still for a moment. The dusty light moved through the windows. Somewhere in the back of the store, a door opened and sent a cool draft along the floorboards. She did not panic. She did not feel sorry for herself. She did not put everything back and walk out. She simply opened her notebook to the pantry inventory page she had made on the first Monday of October and began reading quietly, lips barely moving. What did she already have at home? Plenty of rice, half a sack of flour still good for another week, enough dried pinto beans to last through Sunday at least. She looked at what was in her basket. The cornmeal stayed. The lentils stayed. She set back the split peas, she had enough at home, and returned a small tin of baking powder she realized she didn't actually need until next month. She tallied the remaining items in her head. $1.14, 4 cents under budget. She walked to the register with her basket and set the items down one by one. Mr. Henderson totaled them without hurry, the way he always did, each item announced quietly like a small roll call. The once-a-month pantry audit. It was the first Monday of October, 1961. The children were still asleep. The house was quiet, except for the creak of the kitchen floorboards and the soft hiss of the percolator on the stove. That was when Loretta May Calloway did something most women in Harlan's Creek never thought to do. She opened her pantry door. Not to grab something, not to cook breakfast. She opened it to look. The pantry was narrow, barely wider than her shoulders. Wooden shelves lined both walls from floor to ceiling, each one holding glass jars with handwritten labels, dented tin cans stacked 2 deep, a paper bag of flour tied at the top with kitchen twine. She stood there with a small notebook pressed against her chest, a stub of pencil tucked behind her ear, and she began to count. Every jar of preserved tomatoes, every box of cornmeal, every last dried bean she had carried home from Henderson's General Store the month before. Her lips moved quietly as she counted, not because she was worried, because she needed to know. There is a difference between those two things, and Loretta understood that difference better than almost anyone on Maple Bend Road. Her daughter, Clara, 9 years old and already curious as a cat, appeared in the kitchen doorway rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama, what you writin'?" Loretta didn't look up right away. She ran her finger along the second shelf, counting 4 jars of green beans, then made a small mark in her notebook. "I'm writing down what we have," she said simply. Clara scrunched her nose. "Why?" Loretta turned then, and there was something warm in her expression, patient, like she had been waiting her whole life to answer exactly that question. "Because," she said, "you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you're standing." Clara thought about that for a moment, then wandered off to find her brother. Loretta went back to counting. By the time the percolator sputtered its last breath and the coffee was ready, she had filled 2 full pages in that little notebook. Every item cataloged, every quantity recorded. Beside each entry she had written a small number, how many weeks she estimated it would last. 3 weeks of rice, 2 weeks of cornmeal, plenty of dried beans, low on cooking oil, almost out of sugar. She tore no coupons that morning. She made no impulsive list from a recipe she had spotted in a magazine. She made decisions based entirely on what she already owned. That was the first rule, and it sounds almost embarrassingly simple until you realize most people today walk into a grocery store with no idea what is already sitting in their own kitchen. They buy duplicates of things they already have. They let food expire in the back of cabinets. They spend money filling gaps that don't exist. Loretta never did that, not once. Because on the first Monday of every month, before a single dollar left her household, she stood in that narrow pantry with her pencil and her notebook, and she knew. She knew exactly where she stood. And that knowledge, quiet, unglamorous, completely invisible to the outside world, was worth more than any coupon book or discount sale the town of Harlan's Creek had ever seen. She poured her coffee, she sat at the kitchen table, she studied her 2 pages of notes like a general studying a map before a long campaign. Then she folded the notebook carefully, slipped it into her apron pocket, and began making breakfast. Most people would have gone shopping already. She did something different.